comrades, he instructed them to prepare for their deaths. Unknown to him, however, his daughter, Ariadne, had other ideas, for as soon as her gaze fell upon Theseus, she fell in love with him. Vowing to save the prince, she went to Daedalus, whom she knew was the only person in all of Crete who could help her. At first the engineer scowled and refused her request, because it was Theseus' father who had forced him to flee Athens many years ago. But when Ariadne persisted, Daedalus finally relented and told her that the Minotaur could be killed with one of his own horns, and no other way. He then gave a silken cord to the princess. "If you roll the cord at the door of the maze," he said, "it will unravel all the way to the center, where the monster lives, and where he can be destroyed. Then the thread can be followed back after the Minotaur is slain. But beware, if the cord is not used, Theseus will be lost forever in the labyrinth." Late that very night, Ariadne and Theseus went to the labyrinth, and just as Daedalus had said, the cord began to unravel, stringing a route to the Minotaur. Theseus followed it, until at last he came face to face with the monster. And just as Daedalus had said, the Minotaur was slain with one of its very own horns, lodged in its neck. The prince escaped with Ariadne that night, and took her to Athens. It did not take King Minos long to figure out the role of Daedalus and what had happened, and so he ordered the engineer and his son Icarus to be imprisoned in the labyrinth for the rest of their lives. Yet the king wanted Daedalus to continue working for him, so Daedalus was allowed to have his tools in the maze. One day, the engineer looked up and saw several eagles lazily riding the warm air currents above. The birds sparked his imagination, and a plan began to form in his mind for his and his son's escape. Within an hour, he and Icarus set to work making a bow and arrows. He then shot a large number of eagles, which, when injured, dropped into the labyrinth below. With their feathers, Daedalus made 2 huge pairs of wings, the feathers glued together with an especially strong wax, which hardened as it cooled. Several nights later, the two prepared for their escape, and then flew out of the maze into the skies of glorious freedom. As morning arrived, Icarus became increasingly enthralled at his power of flight, and so began to fly higher and higher. Daedalus, knowing that the sun's heat would melt the wax, desperately called out to his son to fly downward, but his pleas went unheeded. Up and up Icarus went, up into the eye of the sun like a moth drawn to a candle. Soon one feather, then another, and yet another fell from his wings, until Icarus himself dropped from the sky into the waters below, never to be seen again. As for Daedalus, he eventually set down in his homeland, Greece. But he was not welcome there, and so spent the rest of his years wandering westward. It is said that he died in poverty. Nobody knows where. But our story does have a happy ending. Theseus became king of Athens, and Ariadne eventually married the god Dionysus. And the world, at least for a time, was at peace.
Countless ages ago, when the earth was still young and fresh, there were no adults, only children who danced and played all day. There was no need for work in those times, for the gods provided enough food for everyone, in the trees and bushes, on the vines, and in the good earth itself. The gods also provided companions to anyone who wished for one, and that is how our story begins, on the day that Pandora came into the life of Epimetheus. He was to be her companion, and she was to be his. Shortly after Pandora arrived, the young man showed her the inside of his small cottage. Almost immediately, Pandora's attention was drawn to something, a large box that sat near the center of the room. She was curious about it and its contents. When she asked Epimetheus where it had come from and what was inside, he responded that he did not know the contents of the box, nor could he reveal its source, for he had made a sacred promise never to tell who brought it and to never open it. As the days passed, Pandora's curiosity grew more intense. One afternoon, while alone in the cottage, she noticed that the gold and silver cord that fastened the box's lid appeared to have no beginning and no end. How curious. Perhaps I can find out where the ends are by unraveling the cord. Certainly there can be no harm in that. Suddenly, the cord glowed and began untying itself. The box could now be easily opened. Then, just as suddenly, the box began to shake, and voices could be heard from within, pleading, "Let us out! Let us out! Let us out!" Now, at that very moment, Epimetheus was out with the other children, but he was not playing. For the first time in his life, he was gloomy. So he decided to return to his cottage to see if Pandora could cheer him up. He arrived just as his companion was about to lift the lid, but Epimetheus did not stop her, for if truth be known, he was just as curious as she. The creatures were the troubles of the world, evil passions, pain, disease, sorrow, anger, intolerance, and all the rest. And out they flew, to spread to the four corners of the earth. And as they did, everyone changed, and everything changed. And yet, not all that came from the box that day was an earthly trouble. One last creature remained. Her wings, which appeared to be made of rainbows, lifted her out of the box until she hovered near Pandora and Epimetheus. "My name is Hope, and I will be here as long as you need me. It is true that you released the earthly troubles today, but as long as you trust in me, I promise to make things better." Pandora and Epimetheus did trust her, and so things did get better. Yes, the troubles remained, and still remain to this day. But hope showed that today's troubles can turn into tomorrow's happiness.